Hi, it's me, Chris Harder, and welcome back to Showboys, the podcast bringing you a glittery, gritty, full frontal glimpse into the world of boylesque. What is boylesque? We're going to find out. Now, if you see a lot of burlesque, you know that there's a certain kind of performer, regardless of gender, who can make even standing still look sexy on stage. I'm talking about those folks who have a 24-hour kind of smolder, who ooze sensuality, but are by no means a one-trick bump and grind kind of performer. And that, I think, is certainly one of the many qualities of my guest today. Sometimes he's a steampunk slow burn. Other times he's a fast flash of feathers or a finely tuned, well-strung instrument. He's a world-traveling headliner, a teacher, a producer, and really a Jack and a Johnny of all trades. He was crowned Mr. Exotic World at the 2013 Burlesque Hall of Fame, and word has it, he is fully loaded. With what? I'll let him tell us. Please welcome to the Showboy stage. Watch out when he shoots. It's Ray Gunn.
Hi, Chris. Thank you. That's a good intro. I like that. I'm gonna have to steal some of those.
I will happily send it to you. I love writing these intros. And thank you. It's so good to see you again.
Yeah, you too.
I have so many questions for you, but since your name is Ray Gunn and your tagline is watch out when he shoots, how do you feel about gun control?
Well, gun control. Yeah, guns. No bueno. Yeah, like I don't. I mean, unless they're, like insert dirty dick joke here. Unless it's that, then I'm not down for guns. Yeah, like I feel like they're a big problem here in the U.S.
You heard it here, listeners. Ray Gunn, not about the real guns, just slinging the dick jokes on stage. And I fully support both of those opinions. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Yeah, just like today is a costuming, mending and creating day. So that's what I've been doing all day today.
Yes, I see you fastidiously sewing here. What are you working on?
So I took this. I had this idea, and so it's a jacket that had just kind of was on its last legs. So I took it and covered it in tulle. So now it kind of has like a bulk, so it almost looks like kind of a weird fur coat situation. So I'm just sewing in a lining now.
Oh, cool. I love that. Do you do a lot of your costumes?
I do more of them now. That's kind of one of the, I guess, happy byproducts of the pandemic is like having time to sit and start working on things myself and like kind of figuring things out. Like I used to be kind of notorious for like, last minute backstage having somebody help me with something. So I just decided it's like, maybe it's time that I start figuring this shit out myself.
Did I sew something for you at the Dirty Show backstage?
Probably. I mean, I'm a firm believer that it takes a village, and so that could very well be.
100%. You know what? No, I didn't even do that. I just lent you a scissors and a needle at the Dirty Show once. And you know what? I have certainly asked many performers for that as well. I have so many things that I want to talk to you about today, including your costumes. I recently had Matt Finish on the podcast, and I know we talked about this a little bit before, but he said that you hate the word boylesque. Is that fact, fiction, or misunderstanding? Tell me more.
No, that's it. That's a definite fact.
Okay.
And it's for a couple of reasons, and I think it took me a while to kind of truly understand like what the issue was that I had with it. Because
Mm-hmm.
at first it was just kind of it was I didn't really understand why in an industry that kind of prides itself on inclusivity and that whole entire thing, why there was a separation between like performers. And so I didn't like that. And then also just I'm in my 40s, so I'm not really too keen on being called a boy. And then kind of really kind of looking more into it, it was the word boy that I had the issue with.
Mm-hmm.
As a black man, the word boy is like it's a derogatory term. And so it really kind of became more and more of an issue, like kind of the higher in the ranks that I got, and then to know that kind of the at the height, so say like at Beehuff, winning, and the title is, best boylesque, and to know that in some ways that the highest reward that I could achieve is, a bit of an insult to me as a person.
Sure.
So yeah, so that's my big issue with it. I know that it's cheeky, and I know that like it kind of encompasses a lot of things, and like it's a very easy kind of go to. I say, but that's just kind of where I stand on it.
100%. And you know what? I'm certainly not gonna try and change your mind, and I obviously cannot speak to your experience. It's interesting to me because I feel like, ultimately the word boylesque to me is really about branding and publicity, and
Right,
to me, it doesn't have that distinct, clear legacy of racism like other words and phrases
right.
in our English language. I am curious though, and I'm a little nervous to ask, how do you feel about the word show boy?
I mean, actually, like I think that Showboy's kind of cute. Like, I mean, it's that to me doesn't feel as like, and I know this is it's weird because like, how why is this kind of more so okay than that? Like, I think that just being called a kind of just a boy directly is just kind of like it just kind of feels like a kick in the nuts. Whereas like I guess showboy is more of just kind of like maybe like a brush of the nuts. Yeah, it doesn't. It's like a turkey tap.
Sure, sure. This podcast is a gentle, an extremely light touching of the nuts, if you will. Look, I will happily call you a male burlesque performer or whatever you would like me to say.
Well, Miss Jackson, if you're nasty.
Miss Jackson, if you're nasty. Well, I guess it depends. I guess it depends what you want to sew on the Zoom screen for me. But so besides the word itself, how would you describe your aesthetic as a performer, and what can people expect from a Ray Gunn performance who haven't yet been able to see you live on stage?
So let's see. My aesthetic. Well, it's definitely gone through some changes, and it really kind of some of it depends on where you see me. I would say that has a lot to do with it because when doing, say, like a big theater show, there you're more likely to see me do something that's a lot more physical, much more theatric, and with kind of more bells and whistles.
Hmm.
Whereas so if you see me at a bar shows because they're a little more intimate. I like interacting with an audience. So like so if I can like get out into a crowd, then I will and just kind of like play with them and like you'll still see choreography and like sexy and those things, but there's a little more interaction.
Yeah. So I love intimate shows, but I will say it's hard for me personally as a performer because choreography is not necessarily my strong suit. So when all of a sudden I show up at a show and the producer hasn't told me that like that there's limited visibility or that it's like, it's like a packed room, like sometimes like a lot of my choreography won't go past like the first two or three rows of people. Do you find is it easy for you to kind of pivot with that though?
See, that's something that like that has been one of like I think that's been one of my biggest learning curves
Hmm.
throughout my career is like having to pivot because like early on I was very very acrobatic and like big movements and things like that, and then like I go to places like Nurse Bettie and they're like this is not going to work here, so it's like to learning to if the choreography doesn't fit for the this the where you are, just being able to like kind of go with it and then be able to make those changes and like be very present.
Hmm.
Also, I was a cast member of a show here in Chicago called the Naughty Little Cabaret,
Yeah.
which was the show had you had people on three sides, and it was the audience was primarily bachelorettes. So so with like an audience like that, you kind of have to first of all you have to be very very present, and like you kind of have to be able to pivot at a moment's notice because sometimes sometimes these bachelorettes are feeling some kind of way and they feel like because it's their special day that they can do whatever, and so they suddenly want to become choreographers and want to hop on stage or do different things like that. So you kind of have to be able to maneuver and, so through that show, I've really learned how to kind of be present and maneuver in those situations, and also maneuver in those situations and still have fun with it and not be upset because there's something that's ruining my choreography, or like, oh, this is not going the way that I want. It's live theater. As long as everybody is having a good time, and I'm an entertainer, so, and it's about people being entertained, and at the end of at the end of the day, regardless of the choreography, if they're not entertained, then I didn't do my job.
Yeah, no, totally. There's nothing quite as chilling though as the siren scream of a bachelorette or really a maid of honor who's
Yeah,
saying like, it's her special day at like a decibel that you didn't even think was like humanly possible.
right. Or the or like seeing the like wiggle of the like penis straw like head things like in the audience, you just know, you're just like, oh god.
Right, yeah, like in the back of a darkened bar, all of a sudden you see a bunch of like floating neon penis straws, and you're like, oh, they've arrived.
I said, it's like, okay, how's it gonna go tonight? What's gonna happen? And so we used
Yeah,
to call that show the Thunderdome because, like, I mean, crazy shit would happen all the time, and you're just like, wow, okay, this is what a bachelorette party looks like, huh?
right. Yeah, I did that show once, I remember, and actually a bachelorette walked up onto stage and ripped off part of my costume. Like just like in the middle of my act, like totally side blinded me.
Yeah, sometimes you just kind of, like, in your head, you kind of wanna stop them and be like, what what did you think was gonna happen when you came up here? Like, I don't feel like you thought this fully through. You just felt like you were in the moment and then ran on stage.
Yeah, it is hard because I totally agree with what you're saying. Like I think of us as entertainers, and that is a huge part of our job is making the audience feel like they're a part of the show. But it gets so tricky when you have these people who feel entitled to the show,
Oh yeah.
like more so than any other audience member. And it's like I think about that a lot when I'm hosting because like I don't necessarily like it when hosts right away try and like shame somebody unless they're doing something, like really fucked up. But yeah, it can be a very difficult balance to kind of keep the fun going, but also like
Let somebody know that you're like that you're not the one.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
no, and it's yeah, and that's so tricky because you have to navigate kind of handling it with kid gloves, but also not letting them get away with too much to where they think that, oh, they're funnier than you are, and now suddenly they're a part of the show. You know what I'm saying? Because then it becomes
Yes.
disruptive, and if you like, bring the hammer down too early, then you lose the audience, and then it's
Right.
just going to be a long night.
Yes. Oh, I know. I know. Luckily, I feel like there's not a lot of bachelorette parties that I encounter in July. July is like the hottest month in New York, and I feel like maybe that, I don't know, the bachelorettes can't get too dehydrated. So
Yeah.
the streets are safe for July.
So, and fun fact. So, one of the things I always jokingly say when people are like, "Oh, how'd it go?" and I'm like, "Nobody booed," and then people
Mm.
are like, "Nobody would ever boo." So, in Australia was the one and only time, and it was a hens party that booed me on stage, and I was just like, I can't believe this is happening right now. I can't believe these people are booing because I wasn't taking my clothes off fast enough for them. So they literally started booing me. So when people are like, "Oh, that doesn't happen," no, it has happened. I have been booed on stage before.
Yeah, also there's a huge difference between performing for American bachelorettes and hen parties like in Europe or other countries. I remember one time I got booked for a hen party in London, and when I got there I was like, "Oh, I am not the mood for that." Like they wanted like hardcore strippers. I had to follow a guy who took his dick out and wrapped it around his wrist and then picked up a fucking table.
Wow. Yeah.
Hen parties, if you're listening right now, don't book me.
Don't book burlesque performers. What you want are, like, you want hardcore strippers. Like, you want, so like, there's this guy here, and I'm totally gonna plug him. His name is Do Damage, and
Oh, that's a
he is like my stripper hero because the stuff that he does, I'm just like, oh man, at my freest and craziest, I wouldn't even attempt half of the shit that he does, and people love him. So do damage in Chicago. He's amazing. Like look him up, and that's a great name. Do damage.
That's a great name. And I will be Googling him later tonight. I'm curious, Ray, how did you get into burlesque in the first place? What's your origin story?
Well, so at the time here in Chicago, there was another performer named Hot Toddy
Mm-hmm.
who was like he was kind of getting into the industry, and at the time here in Chicago he would do gigs, and I would get booked to be kind of backup dancing and stuff like that. And then he went to the Burlesque Hall of Fame and competed and won. And then when he came back, he was like, "Oh, I want to." He said, "I want to start. I want to start an all male burlesque group." And he sent out this mass text to a bunch of like dancers that he had worked with, and so the three of us that showed up were the three that became the Stage Door Johnnies. And at the meeting, he was like, "Okay, so I want to start this thing, and I've got it set up so you guys have a weekly show at a local gay bar, a photo shoot. I'll choreograph your first acts and just come up with your names and go." So like prior to that, the only kind of knowledge of burlesque that I had was years prior to. I had happened to see I saw a show that Michelle Moore had produced when she was doing she had a show called Lavender Cabaret.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from that, I was like, I didn't know. Like, I was like, I don't know what the hell's going on. I was like, oh, I guess I just, stand on stage, move around, and take something off, right? So I was like, there we go.
So, okay. So, besides like staying on stage and moving around and taking things off, when you are creating an act and when you're starting to kind of like get the glimmers of what's going to happen on stage, do you find yourself going for a specific response from the audience or a specific kind of energy? Like I feel like when I'm creating, my first impulse is almost always to make people laugh. What is it for you?
When I guess when I approach things, it's more of I feel like all of that comes with like being in the moment, and
Hmm.
then kind of seeing how it's like. So I'll set everything up, and like sometimes I'll add things that I know. It's like, oh well, this may get a laugh, or may not, sort of things. But aside from that, like I kind of keep it in the moment, because I know that there have been times that with some audiences, like there are jokes that like they hit and everybody's like, oh, that's so funny, and then like you do that somewhere else, then people are like, oh, like perfect example. I used to do this act, and the basic of the act was like I had suckers, and I would come out with one, and like I dance around, and it'd drop out of my mouth, and then it'd be like, oh no, I dropped my sucker, and then like I'd take something off, and then I'd have another sucker underneath, and then I would go and I would play with the audience, and like I would go to someone, and like as the music was building up, I would kind of coax them into wanting to go for it, and then like as they'd go for it, I'd throw it behind my shoulder, that sort of a thing. So I did that I did it in Seattle, like, and it went, like everybody loved it. And then I did the same thing in Vancouver, and it was like an all male like show. I did in Vancouver, and I went to this guy, and the whole setup, and then I threw it back behind me, and the audience was like, "Aw."
Oh
So I
yeah.
was like, "Oh yeah, this isn't gonna work." So you kind of have to like, I guess, I say all that to say that I don't always think of the audience's responses. I just kind of, it's like either they respond or they don't. um,
Yeah.
I try not to feed into that, because like I get to when I do, I get way too in my head about like, and then I start analyzing everything, and like, oh well, what are they going to think about this, or are they going to think about this, or blah blah blah, and then it's like, and then before I know it, like I'm standing backstage convincing people to help me sew my costume together because I didn't have time to do it myself. So
I see.
yeah.
It's a slippery slope. Yeah, no, that's a good point though. Yes, I think there's a difference between like having an intention on stage and trying to get something from the audience. You know, I said this in my intro. I feel like when I watch you, I feel like you just ooze sensuality, which is not to pigeonhole you in that, but do you would you agree? Do you feel like that's kind of like a constant like thread in your acts or do you
Yeah,
because I feel like when a lot of people watch you, it's like panties wet, underwear wet, mouths on the floor. What's your interpretation though?
yeah. Like I think that I mean, I definitely say that it's something that has kind of developed over time
Mm-hmm.
because early on, I was very muted with like kind of celebrating my masculinity on stage,
Mm-hmm.
and so, but I've just kind of gotten to where it's like I feel like that's where I'm at, and like I think that the like what you're, I think what you're noticing is just me kind of having this celebration of my own masculinity on stage and like being very comfortable with that, and I feel like that type of confidence always comes off as sexy.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say, I mean, to me, I feel like confidence in any, I mean, on and off the stage is the sexiest quality a person can have. And like, regardless of looks, body size, whatever, like, if someone approaches me off stage with confidence, or if I see a performer on stage who's moving like they fucking own the audience, like, nothing is sexier to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Do you feel that confidence on stage?
I would say 85% of the time. There's sometimes where you just kind of got to get through it.
Yeah,
But yeah, and like it's becoming more and more as I get, older and like more just kind of, I don't want to say set in my ways because it sounds like an old curmudgeon, but like just very okay with not apologizing
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes I've found that like male like when guys kind of are confident and kind of celebrate their sexuality, it's
Mm-hmm.
not always it's people don't always know how to take it.
Sure.
So sometimes they're a little quiet. I used to it would I sometimes I used to find myself kind of apologizing.
Sure.
Like you're apologizing on stage for like so you would kind of start something and then it's like, oh, and then back off. But like I've kind of gotten to where I've stopped apologizing and just been, this is me, this is my aesthetic, this is where I am in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And enjoy the moment with me or, you know, wait until the next person comes out.
Yeah, no, totally. That's interesting because I've talked with other performers and I'm glad you said that because I feel like sometimes too, like when I'm on stage, I feel like if I can make, especially like men in the audience, and I guess this goes for straight and gay men, when I can make them laugh, then I feel like I really have them
Hmm.
instead of just like I guess, embracing my own kind of sexuality on stage. But all that to say, what do you think is the sexiest thing a performer can do on stage? Or what turns you on to other performers when you're watching them?
So it's two things, and they're kind of like at opposite ends. Like one is just like kind of like that performer that makes you feel like you're watching something that you shouldn't.
Mm,
Like so it makes you feel like you're because they're so into the moment and like and what they're doing, and they're doing something. It could be whatever, but they're making you they're doing it in this very physical and sensual way that is making it seem like, oh, I don't know if I should be watching this. Like I love that. And then the other thing that is when a performer, like when something goes wrong and a performer can laugh at
sure.
themselves or acknowledge it and then be able to kind of be okay, like because it's like we're all human, shit happens, it's live theater, and like and that I know that that's also very much a kind of that comes with like season and time and like to be okay to like be comfortable enough to laugh at those moments. But that to me is sexy when somebody can do that because like it's also kind of a I don't know. I always see that as, and this is a very far leap, but I feel like those are also the people that would kind of be okay with like laughing during sex, which I also think that's
Mm.
very sexy to be able to laugh during sex.
Yeah.
I mean, not like laugh at them, but like laugh with them, you know?
Right, right. No, I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure I follow you there. Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, not that like having sex and doing a burlesque act are the same thing. I remember what I was gonna say. It's funny to me because sometimes like people ask me, they'll be like, how do you not get a boner when you're performing? And I'm like, well,
Oh no, I feel like that's people ask me that all the time, and I'm like, I feel like when I'm on stage, is like there is no way that I am like that's gonna happen at any point in time when I'm on stage. Like, I mean, if anything, like I am a turtle, and like there's yeah, no, that's not gonna happen. Like, and I was just thinking it's funny when people are like, oh man, I bet. Like they have this idea of like what's going on backstage, and they're like, "Oh, I bet you guys are like, messing around and you got fluffers and all of this." And it's like, no, no, like that's the last thing that I want to deal with when I'm like right before I go on, or like if when I'm on stage, is like, something's like, actual sexy, like, meh, no.
yeah. Can you imagine being backstage at Nurse Betty, which is essentially a closet, like literally in the audience, and then being like, okay, the fluffers are coming in now. Everybody
Right.
get ready. No, I love what you said though about being able to laugh at yourself on stage, and also that is something I think is really sexy in sex as well, is people who like are fully present in their bodies, and also just like all of the like amazing and ridiculous things our bodies do, you know?
Right. Yeah, because I feel like that, like if that to me, and it's in a lot of ways kind of encompasses when I think of burlesque, like what I think burlesque is, and it's that, that celebration of self, and sexuality, and being able to, and like that kind of fierceness,
Yeah.
and I think that that's a like being able to do being able to laugh at yourself kind of encompasses that, because it says, I saw what just happened, I'm present enough to see what happened, or saw what happened, I'm okay, I'm professional enough to recover,
Hmm.
but I'm okay letting you in, kind of in that moment with me, so
Yeah.
that we can have a laugh and then keep going.
Yes. Yes. Is there a performer that comes to mind when you were talking about watching someone doing something that you feel like you shouldn't be watching?
Yeah, actually there are three. So it's Perle Noire, Egypt Black Knyle, and Isaiah Esquire.
Oh, yes.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes to all three. Pearl Noir once gave me a lap dance at a club in Vienna. I thought we were joking, and she's like, I'm gonna give you a lap dance. I was like, okay, ha
Yeah,
ha ha. And I was
her
like,
lap dances are no joke.
no
They are
joke.
no joke. Yeah.
I seared into my memory. And also,
Uh-huh.
like, what an honor. Yeah, for Pearl Noir to even stoop to my level to give me a lap dance. Yeah, it was an honor I shall never forget. So if you're listening, Pearl Noir, just know I think about that night in Vienna often.
That
Um,
lady is fierce.
she
Yes.
is, oh yeah, she is fierce with a capital F. If you turn to the burlesque dictionary under fierce, there's a full page copy of Pearl Noir.
Yeah.
So you already mentioned this, but you were a part of the very much loved, well traveled, and award winning trio, the Stage Door Johnnies, along with Bazuka Joe and Jett.
Yeah, those assholes.
Right, I know. So I guess you already said how the three of you come together, but for people who maybe were not aware of the Stage Door Johnnies, can you give us a little backstory and tell us what was kind of like the dynamic in your group?
So the stage door Johnnies were an all male burlesque group that, when we our motto when we came onto the scene was kind of, we're just like the ladies. You got just as naked as the ladies. We put as much into it. As far as like rhinestones and feathers and blah 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 and all this stuff and choreography. So we had group acts that we would do, and we in the magic of our group acts was the fact that even within the group act we were able to kind of you were able to see our personalities and kind of the dynamic of the three of us, because we're all very, very different, and we're all very different performers. But when we came together as a group, we very easily, it's like, oh, I see why these guys, are doing stuff together, but I can still see each of their individual personalities.
Yeah. What do you feel like were the personalities?
Well, so there's a quote that I think kind of encapsulates it. There's one to take home to mom, one to romance you, and one to fuck you.
And who were you, Ray Gunn?
I'll just let the audience kind of decide which was which.
Sure. How about this? If the three of you were recast in Sex and the City, who would be playing who?
All right, I would probably be Samantha, and Jett would be Miranda. No, who is the one with the brown hair?
Charlotte?
Yeah, Charlotte. And then Bazuka would be Carrie, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. We'd find Miranda somewhere in there. I remember, I think the first time I met you all was at Tigger's Manatee show on Coney Island.
Yeah, you were go-go dancing.
I was go-go dancing, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I just remember being so in awe of the three of you because you're right. Like, Tigger talked about this a lot in the first episode, which you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts. Just, a big thing about, whatever we call this form, male burlesque, that a big part of it is making sure that you step your game up as much as the women and female presenting performers in this industry. And I feel like you three absolutely did that. Every time it was so polished, it was beautifully choreographed, costumed. So that's what I was going to say. What were you going to say?
No, it's just that. So I remember that show distinctly for a couple of reasons. One, so at that show was the very first time that I'd gotten a standing ovation.
Oh.
And it was for Morpheus. And before we had gotten there, Tigger had asked us, he was talking about the show and he's like, oh, there's this thing that I do at the end where, everybody comes out and they have these bladders, and so they stand in front of me and it looks like they all pee on me, and then but it's just white wine, and then we dish it out and give it to the audience. And we had never done anything like that or seen anything like that, and we were just kind of and he was like, so if you want to do it, you totally can. And so when we got there, we were kind of joking about how kind of, out there New York was, because we didn't really have much else as a reference. And so then we were kind of joking. We were like, oh yeah, here in New York, they're just kind of always throwing their dick on the table. And then, almost without missing a beat, when when I said that to Bazuka, you came over and you were changing or something, and you just kind of plopped your pants down, and it was your dick hit the table, and you're like, hi, I'm Go-Go. We're like, see, there we go. New York, always throwing his dick on the table.
That's right, man. I've thrown it on a lot of tables and couches and beds and coffee tables. But I'm more than happy to represent my city. Yeah. I love Tigger so much. But yeah, that is, I love that he slips it in oh, by the way, there's just this little moment where it's kind of like a golden shower. So,
right. It's it's not a big deal. You just gotta come out. And we're like, wait, what?
So if New Yorkers throw the proverbial dick on the table, what do you think Chicago performers do?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I feel like it would be hard for me to say because I'm from Chicago. So somebody else would have to. The observation would.
I feel like Chicago. Here's what I feel like Chicagoans, and I've been able to work with you, a lot of incredible Chicago performers at the Detroit Dirty Show every year. I feel like Chicago performers always come in guns a-blazing, no pun intended, and throw you into a chair and then say oh, is that okay? And then, do I have your consent? And then keep going.
That's Chicago. Yeah, I agree with that.
You know what? Who doesn't appreciate a little consent or a lot of consent? So
exactly.
So in addition to the Johnnies and your own solo performances, you've also produced these truly incredible, multifaceted burlesque, dance, theater, circus pieces under Vertical Sideshow. Can you tell me a little bit about that? What's Vertical Sideshow all about, and what's been some of your favorite works that you've done under that?
So the Vertical Sideshow is it's a project that I originally started as I wanted to choreograph. I wanted to kind of get back into doing more choreography.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a lot of people that I kind of wanted to work with. And so I thought it would be really, it would be interesting to be like, hey, I want to choreograph something on you. Like I kind of see something and I think it would be cool to see how that looks on you. Because it's also kind of a way to kind of get to know people.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then as I started kind of working and refining it, and then Bazuka came in and started working on it as well. And so what we started to do was we started doing shows that we would take and use kind of a ballet format of like story and scale and spectacle and costumes and narration and plot and all of those things, but use burlesque and cabaret elements. So you would have
Mm-hmm.
like we would challenge ourselves to kind of make it so that everything was driving the story. So
Mm-hmm.
even the burlesque that would be incorporated, everything was in some way or another kind of moving the story forward, or kind of helping to develop characters and different things like that. So it was just us. It's me kind of looking at burlesque through a different lens,
Mm-hmm.
and then kind of sharing that with other people. It's like, here's what I found. So some of my favorite things that I've done. One, we actually got the opportunity to do at the Burlesque Hall of Fame on Thursday, and it was this piece called Habanera, and it's a perfect example of kind of the type of things that we were doing. So in that act, we were kind of incorporating a little bit of misdirection, kind of that, like what magicians use.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of having all of the stripping in the forefront, we took, and all of the choreography is in the front, and all of the stripping happens in the background. So you don't really notice it until you just see, it's like, oh wait, they started taking their clothes off. It's very kind of like, rococo punk kind of aesthetic. And yeah, it was just kind of a fun and really cool thing to do. It was nice to take that to Beehoff and kind of show, kind of, it's like, oh hey, here's how vertical interprets burlesque. So that was really awesome to be able to do.
That is so exciting, especially because I feel like, and in many ways, rightly so, a lot of the focus is always on the competition. And I think that kind of forces performers to think about what they're doing in a very specific way, time limit, presentation, everything. But yeah, to be able to like actually just perform and showcase a dimension of yourself as opposed to thinking of like what people want to see or
Yeah, it was fun to like take some of the Chicago people from Vertical, like that hadn't been to Beehoff before, and like we were all there, and we were all there to do, this thing that we loved, and like have fun with it, and kind of also show just kind of another side of like myself and Bazuka,
Mhm.
and some of the other performers that people kind of knew. It was nice to show somebody, show them something that they may not have thought that was possible.
Yeah, definitely. I was gonna ask you because you said, in a way you were maybe borrowing from some of the elements of ballet. You are a classically trained dancer, right?
Yeah, I was, and actually before starting burlesque, I had my own dance company here
Mhm.
in Chicago, and then the economy went belly up, and had to find a different direction. So I pivoted and started taking my clothes off.
Yeah, I know, right? Like so many, like so many people's stories with taking their clothes off. It usually always starts with, well, I know it did for me, needing to pay rent or suddenly
Right.
like being out of a job. Did you ever work as a go-go dancer at all or anything like that?
No, well, ish. Like I've done a couple of gigs where, but it was never like a steady thing. It was always like, some event and somebody needed someone, and I was like, I'll get up there, sort of a thing, but never like, never booked specifically to do kind of go-go dancing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
With dancing, though, for performers who maybe don't have dance as their strongest suit, what kind of classes would you suggest, or what's one tip that you have for strengthening their movement capabilities?
so the very first thing that in any of my composition classes, or or anytime I hear somebody say, oh, I'm not a dancer, so I don't have any movement. I always, the first thing I say is like, you got to learn to use the whole chicken. So there's a lot of natural, like if you just kind of look at your kind of day to day movement, which is all of this pedestrian movement that you have, like
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of really strong kind of interesting movement that's already naturally in a person's body that they they just have to like kind of step back and like look at that and not kind of look at like, oh well, I don't have the same movement vocabulary as blah blah blah, but you know what I mean. So it's like,
Yes.
yeah, you're not a Barishnikov, but you have a lot of interesting things that you do, even just kind of like sitting in an office that like your body naturally does, and
Mm-hmm.
you just have to like kind of like look at that and then really just take and mold that. I mean, that's basically what choreography is. It's just like taking and like movements that are already there and kind of like moving them in different ways and kind of just really being aware of different planes and like of the body and like high and low sort of a thing, and then also kind of what looks good on a body and what doesn't.
Yeah, 100%. And I know it's something that I realized too, like through, working on my acts with other people and also watching performers, that when a performer finds a movement, and especially I feel like taking off our costumes, like the costume becomes such a huge part of that movement as well. Like the ones who actually do something with that costume, or find a movement that just feels like it's so organic to their body, it's so much more interesting than like there's of course like these stock movements that like
Mm-hmm.
we can all rely on, or that are probably, impressive to like Joe Schmo off the street, or
Right.
like a crowd of like dick hungry bachelorettes. But like yeah, it's
Right.
like finding that personal pedestrian movement, like you were saying. I think that's so smart.
It always blows, like I think that's the thing that sometimes kind of blows people's minds, or like that's that aha moment for
Mm-hmm.
them when you just sit when you're like, sometimes you have to literally be like, okay, so what do you do for work? It's like, so pantomime doing what, like if you were walking into work, like show me what that would look like. Okay, now do that just standing up. So do you see that? Okay, so now take that and like how can you take that movement and use that to go across the stage? Just and it's like just keeping it really, really simple, and just because if when you're using movement that and like you're comfortable with, like you find a lot of stuff through that,
Mm-hmm.
because you're not thinking about, oh, you're not thinking about moving, you're just moving, you know
Right.
and there's so much that, like, there's so much great stuff that comes out of that I feel like can get lost when people get hung up on like, oh well, I'm not a dancer.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think there's something, I mean, I've tried to break myself of that habit too of saying that, because I feel like again, it's certainly there's a difference between people who have a trained background in dance. But yeah, like everybody can dance. Like you don't like anybody can find movement in themselves and express that.
Exactly.
I believe in you, listeners. One other question I had about that is I was looking at some of your class descriptions, because I mean, again, like you are truly such a powerhouse dancer, and you've taught a lot of different classes in your career as a performer. And one of those descriptions talked about understanding the different kinds of archetypal teases. And I don't want to ask you to give away your class, but can you give an example of what is like one kind of archetypal tease, or what do you mean just in general when you say that?
Yeah, so basically so in that class what I do is I go through, and so I can't oh okay, so like a parade and peel. So what I do is I give so I'll give a parade and peel, and then I'll give characteristics that I think are of that. So like a parade and peel, like they're typically like at its base level is, it's a performer comes out on stage, they move around, they take something off.
Mm-hmm.
Right there. So, and then, and then I kind of elaborate on it, and, kind of, I also talk about how, like, the one of the pitfalls of that type of act is it's the easiest and simplest to learn, but it's the hardest to master,
Mm.
because there's so many things within that sort of act that that make it good, can make it, can go wrong, or, and then it's like there's an improv element, and then, there's the audience, and so there are a lot of things that can make that. And a good parade and peel is one that will easily make somebody see that and be like, oh yeah, I can do
Mm. A
it.
good one. A good
A
one makes
good
people.
one, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, because it looks effortless. Like it's like it
Mm.
just you're not thinking about like all the intricacies, because it's so everything is so seamless. You don't see the man behind the screen, sort of a thing, and you don't know that all of the things that are going on, and you don't know the fact that you're like literally like doing this when you're, what I mean, like on
Yeah,
stage the whole entire time, and they until somebody gets on, and then they're like, "Holy shit, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be." And they're like, "Yep."
definitely, definitely. And for those of you, well, obviously everyone that's listening that can't see what Ray was doing, he was patting his head and rubbing his stomach at the same time. I like that. I like the idea of making someone feel like they can do my act, and then they try it and they feel like, oh no, there's no way I could ever be that. So back off. So you've traveled and headlined literally around the world. Do you have a favorite place that you have gone to perform?
Yes. So I love St. Louis. St. Louis audiences are amazing. So St. Louis will always have like a special place in my heart. So will Seattle. I
Mhm.
love Seattle too. And overseas, one that kind of stands out that I had a really good time was in Helsinki.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
really liked Helsinki. Yeah, and like, yeah, that was a lot of fun, and it was Bettie Blackheart.
Yes.
Her partner. He is the one that picked me up. For those who have never met him, he's very very tall. Like, and I mean, he's kind of, not knowing him, he could look a little menacing, and on the flight there, I had watched like Hostel like 1 and 2 back to back,
Why would
and
you
so
do that? Oh my God.
I don't know, like, so I was sitting here and I was watching that, and then like I got, so I go and I get my luggage, and then I'm coming out of the airport, and I turn around and I see this giant with like this sign that says Ray Gunn, and I was like, oh god, I'm gonna
Yeah,
die.
he's basically like a Finnish Frankenstein, which I say with
Yeah.
love, and I feel like he also cosplays as Frankenstein as well.
So Bettie Blackheart's mom
Hmm.
made a pair of like the mitten, well, the like fingerless gloves
Yeah.
for me, and of all of the cities and of all of the like swag bags or anything that I've ever gotten, those were my favorite, and they
Hmm.
lasted forever. Like, yeah,
Yes, I have a pair of socks that she made for me that are
yeah.
so, yeah, I wear them in the winter when the heat stops working in my apartment. Yeah, they're so comfortable. And Betty Blackheart, again, just like such an incredible performer and producer.
Mhm.
The Helsinki Burlesque Festival. You know, I was so I had this question on here. I feel like you kind of already answered it, but I don't know if this ever happens to you, but sometimes like when I do interviews or even if I'm just talking to people like in the audience, the question I get asked a lot is like, what's the most embarrassing thing that happened to you? Or what's something that happened that just like humiliated you on stage? And I'm always like, that's such a fucked up thing to ask people. So I'm not gonna ask you that. But what is one of your favorite memories thus far performing?
Let's see. Okay, so this is actually not it. So one of my favorite memories, and this was like off stage sort of a thing, was the year that Midnight Martini won Queen,
Mm-hmm.
I was standing backstage with her, and she was just kind of like dee dee. And I was like, they called your name, and she was like, what? And I was like pushing her off, and she had no idea. And just so like just to see like that look on her face was like,
Yeah.
like that was great. That was a really good one. Oh, the year that we did, actually, it was the year that I won King.
Mm-hmm.
The All Stars and Icons show, being able to perform with like all of those people on stage, like all at once, and kind of to do this thing that, for it to go from just oh, I wonder if, or wouldn't it be cool if we could, and then to like actually kind of realize it, and then to like be backstage waiting to go on and watching like Dirty Martini and like Michelle Moore like rehearsing choreography like right before we go on, and then like us going out and doing like this big thing that like I feel like, I mean, I say this like just out of ego, but like I feel like that was kind of something that hadn't really been seen
Mm-hmm.
before. So that was definitely like a big moment to like be able to be a part of that, and so like you know help facilitate it.
Yeah, definitely. Did you help choreograph that as well?
So okay, so the concept of that act was, it was us doing our version of Rich Man's Frug, which is three different sections.
Yeah.
And so what we did was over the course of a night, and it was like each of us would represent like kind of drinks that you would have. So Jett, and we each choreographed our own section. So Jett section, it was like, when you're having like kind of cocktails and hors d'oeuvres in the very beginning, and then Bazuka section with the martini section where it starts to get a little more raucous, and then I was at the end. I was like, like whiskey and rocks, when it's like shit, all bets are off, and you're just like, just going for it. Yeah, so that was kind of how we set that up, and then we each, it was one of those things where each of us kind of had our like what our dream cast would be,
Yeah.
and it was like at first it was like, oh, they would never, and then it was like, well, we'll just ask them and see. So, and then we were really surprised at the amount of like, oh my god, yes, that we got.
That sounds incredible. And I'm not surprised that people said yes. I think each of you and the Stage Door Johnnies as a whole are a beloved part of the burlesque community industry.
Oh shucks.
And I just have one request. If you do that again, can I play the drunk pancake breakfast that you have in the morning?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much. On the note of Burlesque Hall of Fame, unfortunately, we lost burlesque legend Toni Elling earlier this year. And for those of you listening, if you don't know who Toni Elling was, look her up. She was an incredible, trailblazing African American burlesque dancer, primarily in the 1960s and 1970s. I was just curious, what are some of your favorite memories of her from Burlesque Hall of Fame and getting to know her more over the years?
The year that Bazooka Joe got her drunk on mimosas before the Legends Walk, so that would definitely be one. And actually doing the Legends Walk with
Mm.
her,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of being kind of present with, she like just listening to her and Judith Stein,
Mm-hmm.
kind of, how you are with your friends, and that sort of a thing. So that was like that was kind of a cool thing to see, is like, it's like, oh yeah, so this is what, it's kind of how we're gonna be. And then there was we were in Austin, and Bazooka he was doing this kind of, well, I guess podcast before there were podcasts, and it was called Pillow Talk, where at each show that we would go to, we would talk to some of the performers that were there, and what we would do is like we would all go to their room and then just pile into their bed, and then just like it was like we're just kind of having this conversation.
That's fun.
So we got to do that with Toni in Austin, and it was the Johnnies, and Perle. So that was a really great moment.
Yeah. Are those recordings around? Were they video recordings or were they?
No, no, no. So yeah, and actually it was just audio, and I actually posted the audio for the one with Toni on my my Instagram page.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, just as kind of memory of Toni once after she had passed.
I'll have to check that out. On that note, Duke Ellington famously wrote the song Satin Doll for Toni, which became her tagline. If someone was going to write a song about you, Ray Gunn, what would the title be called?
What would the Bang Boom Pow? That's what it would be. That would be the title of it.
Bang Boom Pow. Okay.
Bang Boom Pow.
Looking forward to that EP dropping. Just a few more questions here. So I always say this, I do a lot of Instagram stalking sometimes to come up with questions and Google searches. And I found one of your first posts on Instagram is you in a martini glass, I think in milk. What is that from?
So it was in Seattle, and it was a Alice in Wonderland burlesque show that Lily Verlaine produces.
Oh.
And she one year she invited me to come up and be the Cheshire Cat. So funny story about that. So I was a Cheshire Cat, and my big act was me coming and doing like a champagne glass, but it was filled with milk. And like it was like partly milk, partly water, sort of a thing. And like we were doing multiple shows, and like the codpiece that I was wearing, like I would have to, so between what, like I think it was like the second to last show, I taken my codpiece off to let it dry and the whole thing like I had done before, and like show went, and so I went to go do my big act, and I climb into the champagne glass, and then I start taking things off, and I realize that I don't have my codpiece on, and so Fossy Jack was standing there because like he was kind of holding the ladder and then like making sure that the champagne glass didn't fall over.
Right.
And he just kind of like looked at me, and I was like, all right, so how are we gonna get through this? And I could see it was like the backstage kind of became like the Muppet Show. These people like scrambling around trying to like figure out like what to do. And so I just kind of like laughed and like kind of sunk into the water, and then it became a lot of like leg stuff and like stuff to the back, and
right.
So that sort of a thing. And I think that picture is actually like it just happened to be on the night and of the show that happened. So I was like, I'm just gonna post this because
yeah, I was gonna say I don't see any like telltale signs of a codpiece in that because it's a shot from the back. Wow. Nothing like a lactose soaked codpiece.
Right. Yeah. I had to get rid of that one, unfortunately, because after that show, I was like, yeah, this is just not. Yeah, like just the smell of it alone, it was just enough to just be like, I don't want to wear this ever again.
Well, it's probably more than some people wash their costumes. So
yeah, right.
Ray Gunn, what's coming up next for you, and where can people find you?
So, well, I'm kind of doing, I guess, in some ways, I guess you would say I'm doing a little bit of like a rebranding of sorts and what have you, and kind of getting things ready to start doing more teaching online, kind of a lot more travel again, and just kind of getting things going. So I would say, because currently right now, you can find me on Instagram for the most part, and Facebook there too. So I would say just kind of keep an eye out, because I've definitely got some things in the works locally here in Chicago. You'll be able to see me at Bordel and Shimmy's House Party coming up soon. So those are some like kind of local things that you can see me at, and yeah, so just kind of be looking out, because I got some things in the works.
That's exciting. I will be keeping a lookout, and I'll make sure I add those Instagram and Facebook links into the show notes here. Ray Gunn, it is such a pleasure to have you on this podcast and to see.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I feel like I get to see you once a year in person at the Dirty Show, which is a whole other podcast in and of itself. But I just, for what it's worth, I think you're such an incredible performer. And, whether you're exuding sensuality or, I don't know, or sewing tulle onto a tailcoat like you're doing right now, you just do it with like such confidence and a skill set that I'm truly in awe of. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Showboys. And make sure, you know what? If you're enjoying this, you know what I would love? I would love if you go over to that little like and subscribe button. And if you just liked it, and if you gave it all those stars, and if you didn't like it, stop listening and go listen to some other shitty podcast. Make sure you join me next week for another episode of Showboys. And until then, we'll see you later. Bye. You want to say bye?
Bye.
Bye. Okay, can you say it in a really sexy way?
No.
Thank you for listening to Showboys. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you didn't like it,
you are a whore, darling.